better late. I mean, I'm glad it was filed. I think filed a little belated. But this week, they did finally get around to seeking the disqualification of the judge in D.C. On the ground. I would have cited more grounds than they did, both factually and legally, but they were pretty competent and capable, just not as thorough and as extensive as they could have been. So there's really three grounds to seek disqualification of a federal judge. You can seek it by the Constitution because you have a right to an impartial jurist under the Constitution. This came up in a West Virginia case, West Virginia Supreme Court recusal issue, actually, some years ago before the Supreme Court of the United States. And they reiterated you're constitutionally entitled to an impartial judge. The second is the ethics rules. There's rules of judicial conduct that govern every judge as well as their oath. Now, the remedy in that case is often actions by other members, by the judiciary's internal hierarchy or by the House of Representatives and the Senate in the form of an impeachment. But it can be cited as additional grounds in a court proceeding. And then there's the federal statute. So Congress was unsatisfied with how well federal courts were disqualifying when they should. That even though the courts have admitted the whole point and purpose of all the disqualification provisions is that the four pillars of judicial power sit on a fifth pillar of power underneath it. And that fifth pillar of power is the perception of power, the legitimacy of power, and the credibility of power in the broader public. The court of public opinion is what holds up the entire court system. The moment nobody believes in the courts anymore, the moment the courts, it's kind of like the Matrix. The moment you realize you can kill the agent is when you can kill the agent. And so the same is true of the court system. The moment you realize you don't have to obey them, you actually functionally don't have to obey them over time, in terms of how that works. Knowledgeable actors within the court system understand this in the judicial branch. And so they go to great lengths, but individual judges generally don't. They love that power. And so Congress was like, you guys are doing a bad job of even defending your own authority. So we're going to pass a statute and say you have to disqualify yourself whenever any reasonable average person might conclude that you might not be completely impartial. So this is a low threshold. This isn't your prejudice. This isn't your incurably prejudiced. This test, by the way, sometimes for a jury. This is just and it's not a majority of people. It's not every person. It's just anybody. Could anybody who's reasonable, on any reasonable basis, have any reason to might conclude that you might be incompletely impartial? So as Trump notes, his team notes, this court fails that test by multiple thresholds. By her own public statements in January 6 sentencings where she couldn't help but yip, which they have all done, by the way. In D.C., their bias and prejudice and bigotry has just come pouring out, Robert, in those sentencing hearings.
It's because it's virtue. It's not bias. It's virtue, and they're showing how righteous they are in the sentencing and the things they've said.
In addition, if the judge has any doubt about what any reasonable observer would think, they have to recuse. Here's the statements that the judge accused Trump of previously for the proceedings. Trying to violently overthrow the government. She knew who was really responsible because, quote, she could see the hats that day. So this is somebody that's obsessively an anti-MAGA hat person. Complained that Trump was free to this day. Complained that Trump had not been indicted. Complained that Trump hadn't been convicted. Considered, quote, referred to him as, quote, the architect of this horrible event. That he was the mastermind of lying about election results, which, get this, were clear cut. Well, I mean, if I was there, I would have brought it. It's like, Judge, you're a liar and a fraud. You're not just the granddaughter and grandniece of foreign communists and have no business on a federal bench with any authority anywhere. You would know the Constitution if it came and fell on your head. But election results in 2020 were clear cut. What fantasy land are you living in? This isn't your commie elections in Jamaica. In America, those elections were anything but clear cut. They don't go that far. They instead just say, look, here's what you said, Judge. A reasonable person could reasonably conclude that you might not be completely impartial, and so you should disqualify yourself. Of course, the nature of a truly prejudiced judge is that she won't recuse herself. But the reason you bring it is it gives you the right to bring an appeal, which is going to be on the focal point because the corrupt prosecutor Jack Smith, he knows that this is a corrupt judge. And so before he loses this judge or has any risk of it, he's demanding a complete gag order that prevents Trump from talking about anything related to the case concerning the upcoming election.
But Robert, Special Agent Jack Smith. His name is actually Jack Smith. I totally forgot. I didn't even put that together. He's a Smith.
I mean, he's named right after the Matrix. He was born in some sort of sick place, probably like it.
There is no valid basis under the relevant law and facts for the Honorable Tanya S. Chutkan, United States District, yada, yada, to disqualify herself in the proceedings, he wrote. Because the defendant, I love it, it's arguing from the conclusion to the conclusion. Because it fails, it fails. So it should fail because it's going to fail. Because the defendant's motion fails to establish any bias by the court, bullshit, Jack Smith. Much less a deep-seated antagonism required for recusal, the court has a duty to continue to oversee the proceedings. I love it, Robert. It's baseless. So carry on. Forget everything she said.
And by the way, please gag him. And we'll call it a narrow order. But just don't let him talk about anything that, get this, on the grounds it could prejudice the jury. Not only that, the Smith now wants an order prohibiting any surveys of the jury like the kind that Emerson just did, showing that 92% of D.C. jurors presume Trump guilty. And well, he doesn't want that happening, so he's like, Judge, don't allow them to do any surveying without your approval and authority, which is absurd. That has never been done in the history of American law. And by the way, the claims he's making that Trump is somehow contaminating the jury pool in D.C., like it's already contaminated. He's trying to uncontaminate it. But this goes right to Gentile versus State Bar of Nevada. What's amazing is the government will often cite these cases, and it's like, you obviously have never read it. You're too stupid to have actually ever read it. Because if you had read it, you would never have quoted it if you're the government. In Gentile versus State Bar of Nevada, a defense counsel who's subject to more limitations than a defendant is, by the way, defense counsel came out and said the police were corrupt, the prosecutor was corrupt, the opposing witnesses were corrupt. It was all a big conspiracy. They lied to the grand jury. I mean, extraordinary allegations. And the Supreme Court said you could not limit his speech. That said, look, unless it's the only thing that's prohibited is you have to prove that the jury pool will hear everything you say, and it's the actual jury pool, not just a group within the jury pool. If look at the U.S. Supreme Court said the Enron case said Houston jury pool was not biased. I mean, after all the hit pieces run against them. So it is a ludicrous, frivolous claim that Jack Smith is making to try to, but this judge is so corrupt and so crazy, she might try to prohibit. She's not only trying to intervene in the election by prohibiting Trump from campaigning by scheduling the trial during the peak election season, and then trying to lock him up before Election Day and try to secure a corrupt conviction before Election Day to try to prevent his election on Election Day. But I'm sure she'll try to gag him, too, because she's that crazy and that corrupt.
No, Robert, she's that objective and she's that impartial that she's going to gag Trump. A narrowly tailed. Oh, Robert, there is no chance. This is the D.C. case. It's federal. There's no chance that trial will be broadcast, correct? Like no chance.
No, it won't. Can't be under the federal rules unless they suddenly change the federal rules, which I don't think they practically can. Okay. But I think this judge, if she continues, see, this is where Jack Smith is stupid, right? He's not just corrupt, he's dumb. You have a federal judge in your pocket, right? You have your dream judge if you're a Democrat. Like I said, the granddaughter and great niece of famous foreign communists that were so crazy, even the Jamaican socialists kicked them out. And so that really requires a whole new level of nuts. So that's her. When you've got a judge like that that's already said clearly in other cases that you know about is hates Trump, that's trying to railroad Trump with the most ludicrous trial date in the history of any case. Why push the envelope? By pushing the envelope of having this judge now try to gag him, you guarantee you run the increased risk that a higher Supreme Court gets involved, sets aside the case, and pushes her out of the case, and there is no trial before Election Day. But Smith is too dumb. He's so power hungry and so used to getting away with it that he doesn't know when to exercise even self-restraint.
It reminds me of the what did he say? Dave Smith didn't call it the Giuliani moment. He called it the Ron Paul moment, where like he's like a Giuliani, sort of drunk on the response, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go a little bit further. It's not enough to get the zinger. I'm gonna say apologize. Now let's go for a gag order because I'm getting praised and lauded by all of my brethren."